That brings us to our closing keynote for the day. Everybody's talking about unicorns in India these days, and we thought we should actually talk about the real unicorn, which is the theme of our conference this time, is really who is this 21st century employee that we all keep talking about. And we all keep trying to picture and imagine and change the education system to create this 21st century employee. Employers want to train their talent to create this 21st century employee. And no one better to answer this question than my former colleague and good friend, Laxman Narasimhan. Lakshman, welcome, and it's great to have you. I just want to quickly introduce you. Lakshman is the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of Reckitt. Many of you know the firm perhaps more through its brands. In India particularly, if I'm not mistaken, Lakshman Dettol would be the biggest. And of course, around the world, Harpic and Woolite and Strepsils and of course Durex. So it's great that you were able to join us today from, I'm sure, a very busy schedule. Lakshman is based in London and heads Reckitt globally. Before that, Lakshman has been at PepsiCo, where he was the Global Chief Commercial Officer, and before that held many leadership positions managing PepsiCo in Latin America. And even before that, Lakshman spent almost 20 years where our path crossed at McKinsey & Company, where he was leading the innovation and the consumer practices and also our Delhi location for some time. Welcome, Lakshman. Thank you so much.
Hey, Pramath, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Let's jump right into this because I know that you have thought about this issue a lot, and you really do have a very unique vantage point, Lakshman. I think of all the speakers that we've had today, we couldn't be luckier than you to have you as the closing, sort of the cherry on the cake. Given your global experience, what are the global trends that you're seeing on skilling and talent? And how should we be preparing for that as educators and employers of this future talent? So over to you, and I know that you're going to speak for some time, and then I'll come back in the end with some questions, and we'll pick up some questions from the audience. So the audience, please put in your questions in the Q&A box. Lakshman, over to you.
Thank you, Pramath, and thank you for having me. It's great to be with you, given everything you're doing to truly transform education and skill building in India, and you've not done this recently, you've done this over so many years, so it's really an honor that you've asked me to come on board. This is obviously a huge question, and it's a question that is so relevant at this time because we're collectively going through a transformative change in the way we think about work and the world of work. And it's clearly accelerated by the pandemic as well. And by work, what I mean, I don't just mean this in the private sector, but I just mean all forms of work in the fullest sense across the private sector, the social sector, the public sector, and the like. And so what really are these changes? And I thought what I might do is just highlight four that I think are particularly relevant to the discussion you're having about, the future unicorn. The first one is clearly digitization and automation, the automation of repetitive activities and just the explosion that's taking place on digital and data. Our former, I guess we are both alumni of McKinsey, and one of the things that McKinsey has talked about is the fact that the need for these manual and physical skills, as well as sort of basic cognitive ones, reading, literacy, basic numeracy and so on, those are going to decline over time. And some of the demand for advanced technological skills, be it advanced IT and programming skills, how this technology really works and how do you innovate with it, this is going to rise significantly. But it's not just the only thing that will rise significantly. The other thing that will rise is some of the social and emotional skills, be it empathy, be it communications, be it entrepreneurship, be it the ability to take initiatives, to deliver projects. Something that, frankly, machines just can't really do, and it's something humans are going to have to do, and the importance of that is going to rise significantly. And the third element is, some of the higher cognitive skills, some of the creativity, the critical thinking, the problem-solving ability, the decision-making, the complex sort of information processing, as well as some of these softer skills on leading and managing others. And this is going to grow significantly as well. So you're going to see some of the declines take place in some of the more routine, I'm going to call literacy, numeracy, and so on. By the way, there's variability in that today, and many people aren't really part of the set yet. But actually what's going to grow is some of these advanced technological skills, some of the social and emotional skills, as well as, some of the higher cognitive skills. So that's one big transformation that's underway. The second big transformation that is in some ways, really accentuated by the pandemic is the fractures in the society today and some of the challenges that we're seeing, particularly on the social and environmental fronts. They're going to require work that take place at the intersection of the private sector, the public sector, and the social sector. The ability to convene, to coalesce, to influence, to make happen. This is going to be at a real premium, and it's important not just for private sector employees, but if you look at an area like climate change, you just can't do it yourself. You're going to have to work with a whole bunch of people in the whole system in order to make that happen. And that's going to, again, accentuate, as I said earlier, some of these social and emotional skills and some of the higher cognitive skills. We're going to find that in this sort of world, teams that you create are going to be boundaryless. I mean, you're going to have people come in for small portions of things, then disperse. And how you lead, how you're part of a team, how the role varies over time is actually really calling on some of those soft skills that really matter. So the second big transformation is, of course, the fractures in society are so large, and we're going to have to address some of these over the next 20, 25 years. The third thing you're going to see is, and we're seeing this already, is actually some of the shortening life cycle of trades. And what I mean by that is we're moving from a world of lifetime employment to a world of lifetime learning, where you're moving from, what one would call sort of a sequential gathering of credentials. I did this degree, then I did that degree, and then did this, to actually really a consequential assembly of competencies. I can do this and I can do that. And it's also an assembly of experiences, almost like a post-LinkedIn world, where you don't have a classic sort of, the time driven by one degree, then another degree, and so on, but really how you think about competencies in a very different way. And given the fact that we're moving from this sort of lifetime employment to lifetime learning, you're going to see transitions take place in what you do. And how you manage through these transitions in an evolutionary manner versus a stop-start manner is actually quite key, because these gaps will challenge, some of the costs that society is going to have to face. And so you're going to have to do it in a way that's quite tolerable. So the third thing you're going to see is the shortening life cycle of trades, lifetime employment to lifetime learning. And the fourth is, and I think this is a very important thing, it's very easy to overlook, but I have an MA, and Pramath, I know that you at Penn did a PhD, and clearly, you embraced some of the humanities as you were doing this. But the liberal arts are a real foundation for how we create an ethical and cultured society. The great books, the philosophies, the histories, the arts, the sciences, it's a very big deal. And this is what makes us human and is the foundation of our civilization. It also ensures that we learn from history and avoid some of the big mistakes that we've made in history. In one area, for example, that it has an implication on is like things like the ethical quandaries posed by artificial intelligence. How do you actually think about that? So you see these four big transformations underway. You see the digital and automation, you see fractures in society that require us to work across these public sector, social sector, private sector. The fact that trades are shortening, but at the end of it, you need a sort of a moral foundation, an ethical foundation, a cultured foundation, because that is so core to what society is about. So what does that mean, therefore? What that means is, if I look at the next 25 years, which is really, in a lot of ways, you might argue, is what an education system is trying to do. It's trying to essentially build the capabilities of the population for the next 25 plus years. Some of these changes are going to be seismic, and the kind of changes we're going to see in the next 25 are orders of magnitude much bigger than what we've seen over the last 25. We've got to really rethink the concept of education, the delivery of education, And what is interesting is one of the things that's causing the change is technology also gives us the tools in order to come to, the aid of how you deliver things, be it with augmented reality or virtual reality, be it with MOOCs and what you can do remotely and so on. So shifts that are going to take place are quite massive, and we've got to rethink both the concept of education as well as the delivery of it, or the concept of skill building and the delivery of it. So what really then, therefore, is the impact on education? And I'm going to use some sort of cute words here, but we've had a linear approach to education. Many parts of the world, some of these basic cognitive skills don't exist. It's a problem we've got to urgently address. But beyond that availability imperative, we've got this sort of model in place that is, 9 years of, kindergarten all the way to, getting into high school, as they would call it. It's the 9 + 4 + 4 plus work experience model. And what is interesting is, as you think a little bit about new graduates coming into the system, and I know for several folks who are in companies, some of these people just aren't ready for work. They're going to have to go through a process of, frankly, 2 or 3 years of additional supplementary work in order to get ready for work. You see all these changes happening, and what we're putting out today is, frankly, not ready for work. Now, in a lot of ways, you have great companies in the past. You see the retailing in the US or even in India, great companies and others that actually have this sort of cross-functional leadership programs. You bring people in and you take them into Infosys and Mysore or wherever, and you're building these skills and rotational programs, and you're actually supplementing what happens in the world of education to get them ready. But the reality is that just the sheer scale of this, given all these changes that are happening, the pressure is going to fall back on the educational system. And so what I'm going to do is not focus my comments on the 9, the basic schooling and basic education, or the 4 of high school, although I'll touch on it at the end. But I'm really going to focus on the 4 years of what I would call post-school education and what that means. And what I'm going to say is, rather than this 9 + 4 + 4, or just the 4, I'm going to give you, a sort of a cute number. It's really, what I call the 20 + 20 + 20. Now, what do I mean by that? A traditional 4-year college imparts education. It's sort of, you get 4 years of education in most countries. I know the exceptions in the Commonwealth, where you have 3-year programs, but let's take the 4 as being the model. And with this kind of semester system, what you have is you've got, 20 things that you do, 40 things that you do, 5 subjects a term, so you've got 40 courses. And these are traditionally delivered through some sort of foundational programs. You take a major, you get a specialty. Mostly these are class taught, and some of them are projects as part of the work that you do. And you've got some programs that have, departmental link programs at the end of it, but you get 40 courses and you go through it. I actually think that what we're finding is that this is actually run its course. Now, why? Because some of the skills that you need to build and some of the experiences are actually at the intersections of departments rather than linked to a specific department. And they cut across the entire physical setup of the university. Now, by the way, there are certainly some fields where you need deep specialization, where you might end up doing exactly what you're doing. But what I'm talking about is, if you're looking at work and what you need to build, particularly given those skills that I've talked about, you're going to have to evolve this between what is taught versus what is experienced. And it really raises a fundamental question, a provocative question: what really is a university? And what is it really delivering? Could the university instead deliver a 20 + 20, 20 courses that are foundational? To get back to what I talked about earlier about the liberal arts, some of the foundational, set of skills, some of the things on, philosophy and on history and, what makes us a civilization, being part of the 20. But then you've got 20 experiences. And these 20 experiences are largely cross-departmental. They bring in the private sector, they bring in the public sector, they bring in the social sector, but they really focus on this high-level cognition, technological skills, as well as the social and emotional skills that are critical for long-term success. So you've got the 20 + 20. Now, the delivery challenge for this isn't easy because universities are organized by departments, you have tenure, they're delivered it in a certain way. They got to communicate, collaborate more with the community and with business. It's not something universities do particularly well, to be frank. And, they're going to have to be far more technologically able. It's obviously a challenge. And just the physical setup of university is going to have to evolve over time. You've got the whole teacher qualification, professor evaluation, how this works. And this kind of partnership model just makes it a bit more challenging for universities. But the reality of it is happening. And there are startups, there are disruptors, there are people coming in saying, look, this isn't working. We're going to have to find ways to disrupt the system. Because we know that if you did, the impact on the student is enormous. You're building competencies, you're building skills, you're building the capabilities out there. And I've seen these models in the US, I've seen it in Europe, and I've seen it in Latin America. And naturally, there are going to be some exceptions. If you've got an academic track, you go to a PhD, all of it. But the reality is these things are coming. The 20 plus 20 courses, 20 experiences are coming. Now, I'm going to add another 20 to this and make it 20 plus 20 plus 20. What I mean by that is you've got 20 years of learning and unlearning after you graduate, as you get ready for all these new trades coming in. And these MOOCs really help. Technology comes in. Students have to recognize that once you've graduated, you're going to be going through phases of learning, but also unlearning, because that's going to be pivotal over time as you make all these transitions. You've got the 20 plus 20 plus 20, and that becomes a really important deal. Now, it's certainly going to challenge universities. It's going to challenge educators. But the reality is, if you focus on competencies and you focus on some of these skills, and I know you are with what you're trying to do with Harappa, I think what you're going to realize is that it becomes entirely apparent to people why this is going to be important over time. I could add a fourth 20 to it, which is what happens in high school. I won't do that, but I see this in vocational training too happening. You know, the collaborations that Reckitt, for example, does with a couple of schools here in the UK. And there's one UTC, as they call it, Technical College in Hull, that we have a partnership with. We were doing this in partnership with the high school in order to build skills in partnership with them. So what I would say to you is, you know, these changes that are happening are fundamentally transforming what needs to happen. The traditional 9 plus 4 plus 4, the 4 particularly at the end, is going to get challenged. The question it raises is that as this work is being fundamentally transformed, how do we actually fundamentally rethink how we build these competencies, how we build these experiences, how we equip people for work, how we equip people for the transitions in work that are going to take place. And what is going to happen, I think, as a consequence of this is the need for reinvention is large, and technology is going to help. But really, it's leaders like you and what you're trying to do, which is going to have to disrupt the system and frankly legitimize it, is, I think, where we need to go. So those are my overall thoughts, just in terms of where we're headed, because this will actually build your unicorn employee, an employee that is skilled, is ready for work the first day, is going to learn how to learn, and frankly, learn how to build even further competences and experiences as the world changes.
Thank you, Lakshman. That's very, very powerful. I think you obviously thought a lot about this issue, and it's almost like our day comes a full circle, because we started with Ajay Piramal this morning and this afternoon, and he started by saying that what he looks for in people is the ability to continuously learn, and you've ended on that note. But there's I can't, I'm really tempted to go back to discuss everything you've said, and we don't have enough time. But because it's such a powerful idea, I just want us to be clear about how you're thinking about these 20, 20, 20 once more. So you are replacing the 4 at the end, or you're suggesting that the 4 at the end, which is the college part, gets substituted with this 2020, and the 2020, of course, those are 4 years, but the 2020, the courses, right? And you're saying instead of the 40 courses that you would do in 4 years, think about extending that to 60 courses, quote unquote.
Yeah, actually, what I was thinking was the 2020 is the 4-year doesn't necessarily change, Pramath, right?
Okay.
The first 2 years are broad in terms of what you do, right? So it's building a foundation across multiple disciplines that make you the kind of leader that you would be.
Okay.
And that takes you your first 2 years of college.
Okay. Okay.
Your second 2 years of college is the second 20.
Right.
And in that, what it is that is actually entirely, I'm going to call it cross-disciplinary, but focused on certain problems and done in collaboration across departments, as the case may be, or with the private sector being brought in, or with the public sector being brought in, with the social sector being brought in.
So those are the,
Example.
yeah, and is that the new version of, because I don't want to put it in an old box, but this is the new version of what would typically be an internship or a co-op model, or people actually getting job project-based learning and all of that, right? So this is on the ground experience.
Well, yeah, and it is a co-op is where you're heading into a company,
Right.
and working with a company like the Northeastern co-op model, as the case may be, right? You're going there, you spend a year, then you come back and study. But this is a little bit different, because this is about, you pick 5 problems, right? And these 5 problems are the 5 problems you're going to focus on. It is actually more like project-based learning and more like cross-functional learning around those 5 problems. But you don't do it just in the isolation of the university. You're doing it in collaboration with the world outside. It makes it a bit more challenging to deliver on and execute. But the fact of the matter is, it makes it real. And what happens is, people are not just studying in an ivory tower or doing something that they feel is theoretical. It's got pragmatic relevance right then and there. And so you're doing 5 every term. So you're doing 10 in the 3rd year and 10 in the 4th year.
Right.
That actually then gives you the ability to come out of it, having said, I've got 20 different experiences.
Yeah.
The partnerships of various sorts that I've done through. I've got 4 years in there. The third 20 is 20 years. Because what you've got to realize is, when you come out, you're going to have to learn and unlearn, and keep growing, because that's going to keep you going through your first 3 or 4 transitions, if I could call it. And that actually really positions you for a career in the world outside.
That's 20 years.
20 years. So the first is 20 courses, then 20 experiences, and then 20 years. So that's 20, 20, and 20.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. So that's the 20 years of kind of lifelong learning going.
Correct.
Right.
Which, by the way, from a delivery standpoint, if you look at MOOCs and what you've got technology really providing you, a lot of folks are not fully yet attuned, but the reality is, it does exist. You have the ability to do this as sort of things that where you're refreshing your knowledge, or you're evolving a new set of skills that you traditionally haven't had. The delivery is largely technologically based.
Very exciting. So I'm going to the next university I'm going to get involved in, we're going to do the 2020, and I'm going to give you the credit and the IP for coming up with this. Very exciting.
Well, I hope it works.
The 20-year bit was exactly what, before you came in, I was talking to, you must have seen him, the Dean of Engineering at Penn, Vijay. And he was exactly talking about this 20-year bit in terms of the kinds of things that Penn Engineering is doing. In fact, interestingly, he was saying that they want to build a relationship with alumni, which is much more around learning.
Yes.
Because, business schools used to do a little bit of that, right, through executive education. But engineering programs and so on would never do that. Now there's a very popular program at Stanford where they're actually doing a liberal arts program for people who want to extend their liberal arts education into that 20 years that you're talking about.
The MLA program at Stanford, for example. Yes.
Right. So very, very powerful idea. Since we have only 7 minutes left, I'd like to take a few questions from the audience, Lakshman, if you will. Sure. One of the questions is, let's see, how much of the lifetime learning onus falls on the employer, and how much of it falls on the employee?
And I think it's a great. I think it's a great question. I think
Rahul Singh, yes, go ahead.
I think the employer needs to have a view of the skills that are evolving over, let's say, the next 5 to 10 years. And so there's, tools, workforce planning, fancy words, but really what you're trying to do is understand, as things are changing, what exactly is it that one needs to provide employees to develop. And then it's a question for the employer to put together partnerships of other, academic organizations, other skill building organizations, because it's almost going to be really hard for the employer to deliver that at the level that you want. Can happen in some cases. Experience is clearly employers can make happen. But the skill building is going to have to be done, with partnerships with a whole range of others. And there are lots of companies that are emerging in that space. At the end of the day, the learning obligation is that of the employee. You can't really force somebody to learn. You're going to have to provide the ability for them to learn. You're going to have to recognize competencies, which are really hard, by the way. They're not really, there's no standardization. How do you know what level someone's at, etc. There's more complications with that. But you're going to have to be open to the idea that you would accept that as part of your career discussions, your progression conversations. But at the end of the day, the onus of this has to be on the employee.
And I think you answered the other question that Smita was asking, which is what should an employer have for the unicorn to flourish in what she is doing? I think you're saying that you can only enable.
Correct.
Onus has to still be on the employee.
For sure.
I loved what you said in the beginning, and I want to. It's your lines, but you gave us some real great one-liners, which said you're going from lifetime employment to lifetime learning, lifetime employment to lifetime learning, and I think that's a huge realization for the employee, but also for the employer, right?
Correct.
That
one of the things, people would imagine that even as the CEO of the company, you might think, oh, it's, you've arrived. But I spend so much time unlearning and learning just to stay current and to stay on the edge, because otherwise you become irrelevant quite quickly.
Right. But two interesting questions and then we'll close. We have another 4 minutes. So Arti Seth is asking that should we not, as educators, build some of the competencies that you're talking about at an even earlier age, I guess in schools? And what's your thought about that?
Well, I actually skipped this fourth
Yes.
20, as I was saying, because I didn't want to make it more complicated. But I'll tell you something, I give an experience I just had about 4 weeks ago. I went to a place called Hull, which is where, Reckitt started over 90 years ago or so. And there is a technical college that I went to. And I saw students who were in the Indian equivalent of the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th standards, really. And I was amazed at some of the questions they asked me. I was amazed at what they were doing, project-wise, but also learning-wise. And I was actually surprised that they came into work with us, particularly in the 10th, 11th, and 12th. The thing about it is that if I go back to the German system, you've got a degree of openness to the idea that you might have a different track. Like you come in through a vocational training, and then you end up getting a job, and it doesn't preclude you from getting a degree later on. You could theoretically just keep advancing. I mean, I know there are kids who've come in and they've done 3 or 4 years and they're not at the same level as someone who's graduated, right? And they can choose to go in and, do a graduate degree or whatever it is. But you've got to have the ability for paths to crisscross. In a lot of societies, that's not the case. In a lot of societies, it's much more hardwired. And I think we're going to be ending up in a place, particularly as technology comes in, that you've got to build the skills at the school level, which you do. But then beyond that, you need to have paths that will crisscross.
Great example, and I think that's one of the things that we in India have to get used to. That everybody doesn't need to go to college to have arrived or gotten employment. Last question. So, as a organization and a global organization, what are the 1 or 2 things that you look for in talent that you hire?
Look, I do think this notion of, there are things, you look for that I would call standard, right? Standard as in you want people with edge, you want people who deliver, you want people who are ethically grounded and morally grounded. You want people who can lead others as opposed to, alienate them. You want to have people who can actually, bring the organization with them. Clearly, those are important skills and important things that you want to have. But I think what's going to differentiate people going forward is this notion of renewal and learning, unlearning, relearning, and moving, because it's really going to, given the pace of change and where we're at, we as a company, we as an organization, as a global organization, need to evolve, we need to innovate, we need to create new things. And the leader, I say more than the employee really at some level, because they're all leaders, who can do that, they're the ones who actually will truly break through and can do this at a global scale. So it means what they need is they need cultural sensitivity as well on top of that, to be able to imagine that it isn't just, that you've operated in one environment. I need you to do the same thing in multiple environments in order for you to be capable of leading a global organization.
Wow, there was so much to learn from this discussion, and I'm sure that we could go on for a while. And that was a question from Aparna. I didn't note her name. But thank you so much, Lakshman, for joining us. And I've taken away so much from this. I'm so glad that we got a chance to spend some time together. But lifetime employment to lifetime learning, I don't think I'll ever forget that. You said something else, which I know you're very deliberate about your choice of words. I think you said sequential degrees to consequential competencies, or right?
Consequential assembly of competencies.
Consequent assembly of competencies, and I think that was another great one. And then, of course, the way you articulated the 20-20-20 is going to stay with me till I've got it implemented somewhere, and call it the Laxman method.
Please don't do that.
But thank you so much, and we couldn't have had a better end to our first day of this conference, and I'm really grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. What you're doing is wonderful, and it's an honor to be with you.
Thank you. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we are at the end of our day one at Bridge. I hope you enjoyed the day and learned a lot. I certainly did. At this point, I'm going to hand it back to Nikhil Gambhir, our track host, who will tell you about what day two looks like. Please do come back and join us tomorrow, and we have some great sessions lined up for you tomorrow, which Nikhil will tell you more about. Good night from my side, and over to you, Nikhil.